Have you ever looked at a coworker or maybe an employee or even just a whole team and thought, why on earth aren't they doing what they're supposed to do?
Oh, yeah. Constantly. It's like the universal management experience, right?
Exactly. I mean, you've handed them the memo, you've explained the process step by step, but they just keep making the exact same infuriating mistake.
Right. And your first instinct, and honestly, the instinct of almost every manager on the planet, is to just write them up or, send them to some mandatory training session.
Which is why today's deep dive into the source material is so important. We're going to show you why about 80% of the time that worker isn't the problem at all.
Yeah, it's really the system. We're diving into this massive paradigm shift championed by Geary A. Rummler.
Right, the legendary performance consultant.
Exactly. He spent decades fundamentally rewiring how major corporations approach human behavior. And we're looking at a series of transcripts from his talks spanning from 1981 all the way to 2008.
And the core mission of this deep dive is to equip you with a completely new lens for viewing these performance issues.
Yeah, the goal is to shift you away from that gut instinct to just fix or train the person.
Right, we want to teach you how to essentially x-ray the invisible architecture surrounding that person.
Because Rummler's whole philosophy is that people are generally acting perfectly rationally.
Which sounds wild when you're frustrated with them, but it makes so much sense. By the end of this conversation, you will never look at a workplace mistake, or honestly, even your own stubborn habits, the exact same way again.
Totally. But to get there, we really have to start by looking at this fundamental diagnostic bias we all carry.
Right, it's like we treat machines with this ruthless logic, but the second a human being is involved, we just get incredibly emotional.
Yeah, Rummler used to illustrate this with this great story from a 1986 vice president staff meeting.
Oh, I love this one.
It's so classic. So a group of engineering and manufacturing VPs are sitting around a boardroom table, and one of them just complains, "We still have this problem with the goddamn engineers not getting their reports in on time."
And notice how quickly the room just leaps to diagnose the problem based entirely on their own assumptions, right?
Exactly. One VP is like, "Oh, it's an attitude problem." Another says, "Well, engineers fundamentally just cannot communicate."
Uh-huh. And then the third one suggests, and this is a classic, that they need to train supervisors to motivate the engineers to communicate.
Which is just this spectacular pile of corporate buzzwords.
Right. I mean, they define the problem entirely in terms of this assumed psychological solution.
Yeah, but Rummler points out, imagine if instead of human engineers, those exact same executives were dealing with a room full of million-dollar report writing machines.
Like a literal black box on the factory floor.
Exactly. If someone walked into that meeting and said, "Hey, the report writing machines are malfunctioning," those executives would completely change their tune.
Yeah, they wouldn't sit around complaining about the machine's bad attitude.
No, they'd put on their diagnostic hats immediately. They would systematically ask, is it all the machines or just some? Is it happening on all shifts?
Right, like are we using the right paper? Is the ambient temperature in the room too high?
Exactly. They would look at the environment surrounding the machine.
It really reminds me of dealing with a car that won't start in your driveway.
Oh, yeah, that's a good comparison.
Like you don't stand there screaming that your car lacks motivation or, that it needs a communications seminar.
Right, you check the battery.
Exactly. You check the starter. You look for the broken link in the mechanical system. So why does all our diagnostic logic just fly out the window the second a human is involved?
Well, because blaming the person is just easy. It gives management this illusion of control without requiring them to actually audit the environment they themselves created.
Oh, that is so true. It's so much easier to say they're lazy than to admit, my system is broken.
Right. But when Rummler applied that logical, machine-like diagnostic to those engineers, he found out they were actually acting with perfect, ruthless efficiency.
Wait, really? So they weren't just slacking off?
Not at all. He actually bypassed the executives and went straight to the engineers to ask why the reports were late. And he discovered this brilliant structural flaw.
Okay, what was it?
The engineers were caught between two deadlines. There was this phony early deadline on the 5th of the month, which was when the report was due to their direct supervisor, and then a real deadline on the 15th, when it had to go up to the executive level.
Gotcha. And let me guess, the consequences for hitting that early deadline were just miserable.
Oh, entirely. If an engineer actually turned the report in on time, on the 5th, the supervisor would get out their red pen, act like a frustrated high school English teacher, and make the engineer rewrite and edit the document multiple times.
Wow. So the reward for being punctual was just being punished with days of agonizing extra work.
Exactly. But the engineers figured out a loophole.
Of course they did.
Right. If they intentionally waited and turned the report in incredibly late, say, on the 13th or 14th, the supervisor would panic about missing the real executive deadline.
Oh, so the supervisor wouldn't have time to demand all those rewrites.
Exactly. The supervisor would just fix the report themselves, hand it to clerical to type up, and send it up the chain. The engineer never had to look at it again.
That is amazing. So by getting it in late, the engineers completely bypassed the painful editing process.
Yeah, they weren't lazy. They were highly efficient survivors navigating a totally broken environment.
Which just completely changes how we map out the workplace. And I think that perfectly sets up the actual anatomy of behavior, which Rummler formalized into something called the Human Performance System.
Right, the HPS. To actually x-ray a problem, Rummler gives us 5 specific components to look at.
Okay, break those down for us.
First is the input, the trigger that tells the person to do the job. Second is the performer, the person actually doing the work. Third is the output, which is the final product.
Okay, pretty standard so far.
Yeah, but here is where it gets interesting. Fourth is the consequences. What happens to the performer after they do the work? And fifth is feedback. The information the performer gets about whether their output met the standard.
And it seems like most managers just spend all their time obsessing over the performer and the output, right? Like they hire a smart person, tell them what to produce, and then just walk away.
Exactly. But the true leverage, the invisible architecture controlling everything, lives in the consequences and feedback boxes. People do things that lead to positive consequences, and they avoid things that lead to negative ones.
Right.
But there is a critical distinction here, the one that trips up almost every organization. We are talking about consequences to the performer, not to the organization.
Okay, that's huge. Can you give an example of that misalignment?
Yeah, let's look at a classic factory floor scenario. Imagine a worker named Diane. Management tells her, Diane, you must take the time to attach this widget perfectly. If you don't, the whole product will fall apart in 3 weeks.
And management probably assumes that's a really powerful consequence.
They do. But a product breaking in 3 weeks is an organizational consequence. It hurts the company's bottom line. It doesn't actually hurt Diane.
Right, because if we look at the consequences in Diane's actual reality, it's completely different.
Exactly. If she takes the extra 5 minutes to attach that widget perfectly, she falls behind on her daily production quota.
And because she's behind quota, her manager yells at her at 5:00 Rio PM.
Yeah, and because her manager keeps her late to yell at her, she misses her carpool home.
Oh, wow. So in Diane's human performance system, doing the job perfectly results in a terrible, immediate, highly negative consequence for her personally.
Precisely. Those immediate personal consequences will always far outweigh abstract organizational goals. And we see this dynamic play out spectacularly in this famous 1981 case study involving an airline ticket agent.
Oh, the $2 fee story. I love this one.
It is so telling. So the airline instituted a very simple policy. If a passenger checks a third bag, the frontline agent must collect a $2 excess baggage fee.
$2. I mean, it sounds incredibly straightforward. Management probably assumed the input is a passenger with 3 bags, the performer is the agent, and the output is $2 in the register.
That's exactly what they thought. But let's actually x-ray the consequences and feedback in that agent system. The agent asks for the $2. Consequence number 1. The passenger who just paid $800 for a cross-country flight absolutely loses their mind.
Oh, I can picture it. They scream at the agent, demand to see a supervisor. That is immediate, harsh, negative feedback.
Totally. But let's say the agent persists and tries to process the fee anyway. Consequence number 2. The airline's bureaucracy requires the agent to fill out a 5-part paper form to process that $2.
5 parts for $2.
Yes. And of course, these forms are never stocked at the desk, so the agent has to leave their station, wander the back offices asking coworkers for Form 583, and just waste 3 minutes.
And during those 3 minutes, the line of angry passengers is backing up entirely across the airport lobby.
Which triggers consequence number 3, the absolute kicker. The door behind the counter flies open. The station supervisor storms out, sees the massive angry line, marches to the front, and finds out this entire delay is over a $2 fee.
And I'm guessing the supervisor doesn't praise the agent's strict adherence to corporate policy?
Definitely not. The supervisor yells at the agent, publicly tears up the baggage form, tells the passenger to keep their money, and just barks at the agent to hurry up and clear the line.
Wow. So if we map that against the human performance system, the feedback loop is perfectly engineered to crush the desired behavior.
Exactly. The system is essentially screaming at the ticket agent, you have to be a masochist to try and collect that fee.
So naturally, the agents just adapt to survive. They stop asking for the money.
Yeah. Skycaps start wheeling massive carts of extra luggage right past the counter, and the agents just intentionally look the other way.
But then a vice president of marketing happens to be walking through the terminal, right? And he sees an agent ignore a third bag.
Oh, and he is furious. He goes back to corporate and writes a memo.
And what does the memo say? Because I bet it doesn't say, our frontline environment heavily penalizes agents for collecting the fee.
Of course not. It says, our agents don't know how to collect the fee. He looks at a broken system and diagnoses a broken performer.
Which triggers the absolute classic corporate reflex, the training department.
Right. The VP of Personnel orders mandatory retraining for all agents. They pull the agent out of the airport, put them in a quiet classroom, and literally use flashcards.
Flashcards.
Yes. What is this? It's a passenger. How many bags do they have? 3? What do? I asked for $2.
And the agent passes the test, gets certified, and then what? They're just dumped right back behind the exact same ticket counter.
Dropped right back into the lion's den. With the exact same angry passengers, the exact same missing 5-part forms, and the exact same screaming supervisor.
Wait, so treating a systemic issue with a training session is basically like a doctor prescribing painkillers to a patient with a compound fracture in their leg.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Like, it might make management feel like they did something productive for a minute, but they are just masking the symptom. The bone is still snapped in half. The environment hasn't changed at all.
And then management is always completely mystified when, 6 weeks later, that fully retrained agent stops collecting the fee again. They just assume the agent is stubborn or untrainable.
They never realize they sent a perfectly capable person back into an unwinnable system.
Exactly.
But, this raises a massive structural question for me. If the frontline ticket agent is just a rational survivor of a bad system, what about that supervisor who stormed out of the back room and humiliated them?
Right, the one who tore up the form.
Yeah. I mean, publicly tearing up the form in front of a customer sounds like the definition of a toxic, unhinged boss.
Yeah.
It's so tempting to say, okay, the agent isn't the problem, but that supervisor definitely needs to be fired.
It is tempting.
Yeah.
But Rummler cautions us against that instinct. We have to give the supervisor the exact same systemic benefit of the doubt that we gave the frontline agent.
Really? How so?
Because organizations are not just single systems. They are nested hierarchies of performance systems. That supervisor is trapped inside their own hidden box of consequences, dictated by middle management.
Oh, I see. So when you audit what corporate is actually measuring at the supervisor level, the puzzle pieces snap together.
Exactly. The airline literally does not track the $2 excess baggage fees.
Yeah.
There is no line item on the supervisor's performance review for baggage fees collected.
But there is a massive glaring metric they do track obsessively, right? Average wait time?
AWT, yes. The airline employs quality assurance personnel, what the frontline workers derisively call red finks, who secretly roam the lobby with stopwatches, measuring exactly how long passengers wait in line.
Oh, wow.
And this data isn't given to the supervisor in real time to help them manage staffing. It's kept confidential, compiled into monthly reports that go all the way up to the executive suite, and then used to ruthlessly evaluate the supervisors.
So the wait time data just descends like a hammer.
Exactly. The supervisor faces 0 consequences for ignoring a $2 fee, but faces immense career-threatening consequences for letting a line stretch out the door.
That completely flips the perspective. Tearing up that baggage form wasn't an act of malice against the agent. It was a desperate, entirely logical move by the supervisor to protect their own job from the AWT stopwatch.
You nailed it. And to explain the gravity of these cascading systems, Rummler frequently referenced this classic concept from experimental psychology: the rat in the box.
Okay, tell me about the rat in the box.
So if you put a rat in a testing box with an electrified grid floor, and you shock the rat if it moves to the left, and you also shock it if it moves to the right, you're placing it in an unwinnable scenario.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right. But experimental psychologists know a crucial secret. You have to put a heavy lid on the box, because if you don't, the rat won't stay and learn your confusing, painful maze. It will simply jump out of the box entirely.
Huh. And human beings are at least as smart as rats. So when executives put managers in a damned if you do situation, the managers will just jump out of the box. They'll find a way to evade the system entirely.
We see this clearly with factory floor supervisors dealing with union environments. Imagine a supervisor sees an employee leaving their shift 15 minutes early.
Okay.
If the supervisor disciplines the employee, the union steward files a massive grievance, human resources caves to avoid a strike, and the supervisor looks powerless.
But if they ignore it,
If the supervisor ignores the employee leaving early, senior management writes them up for being a weak, ineffective leader. It is an electrified grid on both sides.
wow. So how does the supervisor jump out of the box?
They make sure they are mysteriously never on that specific side of the factory floor at 2:45 p.m.
Oh my gosh, of course.
They hide in the supply closet. They take a sudden bathroom break. If they never see the employee leave early, they never have to make the impossible choice.
The system engineered a supervisor who intentionally avoids supervising.
Exactly. Just marvel at the unintended consequences of that. A corporate decision to keep wait time metrics a secret drifts down the hierarchy and results in a frontline worker being publicly berated over $2.
It's amazing the gravity these bad systems have. Like, how often do executives sit in boardrooms designing these metrics, completely blind to the fact that their abstract spreadsheets are just manufacturing erratic avoidant behavior in middle management?
All the time. And this misalignment doesn't just frustrate individuals. It can bring down entire multi-billion-dollar empires.
Really? Like, on a macro level?
Yes, this is where Rummler's work zooms out from the micro level of a single worker to the macro level of the entire organization.
Hmm.
An organization is just a giant processing system. It takes inputs, turns them into outputs, and delivers them to a receiving system, which is the marketplace.
Right. And if they ignore the feedback from that marketplace, they die.
Exactly. If the internal metrics become disconnected from the external feedback, you get an existential crisis. A catastrophic example of this happened in the American auto industry, specifically the big three automakers during the 1960s and 70s.
Oh, the 70s auto crisis? What was the internal disconnect there?
Well, in the early 1960s, consumer input started shifting. The marketplace was asking for smaller, more efficient cars. And the automakers responded initially by introducing models like the Valiant, the Falcon, and the Corvair.
Okay, small cars. Makes sense.
But internally, the auto companies were operating on a rigid bean counting system. Their internal performance metrics tied profit margins and executive bonuses heavily to the physical weight and size of the vehicle.
Wait, literally the weight.
Yes. Their internal criteria explicitly told them they could not make real money on small, light cars. The system rewarded them exclusively for producing heavy machinery.
Oh no, so what did they do?
Consequently, year after year, the designers and engineers artificially inflated those supposedly small cars. They'd add a few inches to the wheelbase one year, a wider chassis the next, and a few hundred extra pounds of steel the year after that.
So by the early 1970s, those originally compact cars had ballooned to the size of Lincolns.
Exactly. The organization was completely ignoring the evolving demands of the marketplace because their internal human performance system heavily rewarded weight.
And then the macro environment delivered a vicious, undeniable piece of feedback. The 1973 oil embargo.
Boom. Gas lines stretched for miles across the country. The market fiercely and suddenly demanded highly fuel-efficient, genuinely small cars.
And the Japanese automakers were perfectly positioned to capture the market, right? Because their internal systems were aligned with that efficiency.
Exactly. But the American executives sitting in their corporate towers in Detroit were incredibly slow to react. They just couldn't perceive the crisis.
Well, they couldn't perceive it because they were entirely insulated from the feedback loop. I mean, American auto executives drove company-owned cars. They parked in private garages at headquarters and drove to private garages at their estates. Their vehicles were completely serviced and fueled up by corporate staff as part of their executive compensation packages.
They literally never had to sit in a gas line.
That is wild. Their internal, artificially constructed environment completely severed them from the macro feedback loop, and it drove the most successful corporations on Earth to the brink of bankruptcy.
When your internal metrics override external reality, failure is inevitable. And, this macro disconnect doesn't just apply to product design. It regularly infects how organizations handle internal operations and training, too.
Like the insurance example from the sources.
Yes. Rummler tackled this fascinating case study involving a massive property and casualty insurance company. A vice president of claims noticed that payout margins were eroding, so the company was losing money on insurance claims.
And let me guess, the VP's immediate reaction was the classic fix-a mentality. See a problem, assume the frontline worker is broken, prescribe a training class.
You know it. The VP demanded a massive, expensive 5-day training program for all field claims representatives to teach them better techniques for scoping damage on houses and cars.
But Rummler's team refused to blindly build a training module without auditing the system first, right?
Right. They mapped the entire macro process of an insurance claim. They tracked a claims journey from the customer's initial phone call through the underwriting department to the frontline field reps and finally to the payout desk. They basically X-rayed the entire sequence of events.
And when they laid out that systemic X-ray, they discovered a massive misdiagnosis.
Huge.
The scoping damage step, which was performed by the frontline field reps, was perfectly fine. The reps knew exactly how to assess a broken roof or a dented bumper.
Exactly. The actual breakdown, the step that was hemorrhaging money, occurred much earlier in the pipeline. The failure was in the claim qualification step.
Which is the process of determining if the customer's policy even covered the damage in the first place.
Right. And the revelation of who was responsible for that broken qualification step is just profound. It wasn't the frontline field reps who were about to be subjected to a 5-day training course.
It was the supervisors.
Yes. The performers failing at claim qualification were the claim supervisors.
So the executive team had misidentified the broken step in the process, targeted the entirely wrong group of performers, and were preparing to spend millions of dollars on a useless solution.
It is exactly like a surgeon who has a patient complaining of agonizing foot pain. The surgeon takes one look, assumes the foot must be broken, and preps the patient for foot surgery.
But a comprehensive systemic X-ray shows the actual problem is a pinched nerve in the patient's lower back.
Exactly. Operating on the foot wouldn't just be a waste of time and money, it would be gross malpractice.
Wow. That insurance case study really distills the ultimate truth of Rummler's decades of research. Roughly 80% of the time, when you are not getting the performance you want out of a person or a team, you do not have a bad performer, you have a broken system.
If you want to change behavior, you have to stop wishing for performance and start actively engineering it. You must fix the input, clarify the output, remove the task interference, and most importantly, ensure the consequences and feedback loops are tied to the actual reality you want to create.
So, what does this actually mean for you listening right now? The next time you are pulling your hair out because a colleague, a direct report, or a whole department just won't do what they're supposed to do, take a breath.
Yeah, just pause.
Fight the biological urge to immediately assume maliciousness, laziness, or a lack of intelligence. Step back and X-ray their system. Look for the invisible consequences shaping their daily reality.
Ask yourself, are they trapped in a damned-if-you-do rat box? Is there a hidden spreadsheet or a misguided supervisor actively punishing them for doing the right thing?
Be the mechanic carefully tracing the wires in the system, not the angry driver kicking the tires of a car that won't start.
It really is a profound paradigm shift, and it replaces endless frustration with intellectual curiosity. When you assume that people are acting rationally within their environment, you stop fighting their personalities and you start redesigning their reality.
Redesigning reality, that is a powerful concept. And that brings up a provocative final thought I want to leave you with today. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about massive corporate structures, airlines, and auto manufacturers. But what if we applied this human performance system to our own personal lives?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Think about the things you struggle with. If you can't stick to a diet or you keep failing to build that morning workout habit, maybe it is not a lack of willpower. Maybe it is not a fundamental moral failing on your part. Maybe your personal environment, the way your kitchen is stocked, the friction in your daily schedule, is a flawlessly engineered system designed to perfectly produce the exact bad habit you are trying so hard to break.
That's a great point.
If 80% of the time the system is the problem, how would you redesign your own consequences? Something to mull over as you X-ray the invisible architecture of your own life. Keep digging deeper.